That leads into my next question, which is describe the life of a writer, including the challenges and the moments of satisfaction and the way that you keep disciplined as a writer to stick to your craft.
Describe the life of a writer. Okay, well, my writing life has changed because it's not the same, obviously, as it would have been when I began writing seriously when I was about 27. That morning when I had the baby in the high chair and everyone had gone to school. And in the beginning, it was astonishing what happened, because obviously there had been some kind of a backlog in me, or something in me that wanted to write that had not yet been released. And when it was released, you couldn't stop me for a second. I was writing on streetcars, I was writing in the basement beside the washing machine, I was writing while I was talking to people on the telephone. I was just constantly writing. That has calmed down considerably since then. But that was a great moment. My daily life now is very different, because of course I then went forth and published what it was that I had written, and then in comes the other side that I was talking about before, and that is the career side, which is just like any other job in many ways. And that is, you have to have an agent, and you have to have a publisher, and you have to talk to business people, and you have to do all this stuff. And of course, again, I have to say that that's a privilege too, because there are thousands and thousands of very good writers out there who will never, ever have to deal with publishers or agents, simply because they'll never get the opportunity to do so. I mean, there's a lot of luck in this. That's another thing that I'm never unaware of. As a matter of fact, I was on a committee for years and years and years with the Writers' Trust that dealt with writers in trouble, people who were literally out of money, who were ill and couldn't function, and et cetera, et cetera. And I always said it's like keeping a skull on your desk. You should never forget that the fact that you're being published, the fact that you're being paid attention to, I would say at least, I mean, obviously you have to have a certain amount of ability in order to have that happen to you, but you also have to be extremely lucky. And so in my daily life, I try to remind myself how lucky I am to be able to do the two things that I love more than anything, and that is read and write. It's fantastic.
What a gift.
It is, and I think while you were talking, I was thinking about the two sites on my favorites list on my computer that I use more than anything, and that's dictionary and thesaurus.com. And on those days when I'm at my work area and there's nothing going on, and that happens every once in a while, I go on there and I have little lists of words that I encounter in my reading, which I do all the time, that I need to know about. So I look up the words on dictionary.com and I come to understand their meaning, and I click the little audio button and I learn their correct pronunciation. And then I read the definition again, and then I use it in a sentence. Fantastic. And I keep on gathering and harvesting those tools, because I never know when I'm working when the perfect word is going to be one of those ones that I harvested myself. And so my life as a writer is the constant gathering of new resources. So I read at a wacky pace sometimes, but I'm always reading, and I'm always keeping my eyes open for the things that people do, the way they sit when they're watching somebody, the way their feet move, you know, the way their hair hangs over their eyebrow, the kind of jewelry that they wear, the way they talk to each other in restaurants, what they say on the bus. I'm always gathering with all of those senses that I was speaking about earlier, because that's my toolbox. And the more I drink that in, the more the perfect gesture, the perfect description is just going to fall into place when I need it. So my life as a writer is being aware that I don't have everything that I need right now forever and ever, that I have to keep myself open to the process of constantly gathering. It's like that little robot in that movie Short Circuit way back in the 80s, when he got struck by lightning and he suddenly came to life and he went rolling all around the world going, input, input, in. That's pretty much like what I am these days.
Input.
It's sort of, I always think of Robert Louis Stevenson too. I always thought that this tiny little poem was so apt, and that is, the world is so full of a number of things. I'm sure we should all be as happy as kings. And if that isn't a writer's poem, that's it. Anybody else with some?
Describe who influenced you in your life, in your writing, and also if you could share an anecdote of someone whom you've influenced with your writing. Maybe a reader contacted you or someone in your community has shared how much your writing has meant to that person. We'd be interested in hearing about that.
This time it really is you first. I said, this time it really is you first.
Okay. Well, you know, I've been blessed a whole inordinate amount in my life because people have come along at certain junctures that were saintly in terms of what they were able to give me. So to narrow that down to one person is really, really hard. But I think of a librarian. Which said, Deb and I said to the librarian when we got here, so librarians are our favorite people. And there's a reason why. Because when I was homeless when I was 16, I largely had nowhere to go. I had a grade 9 education and no skills, and I was lost in this world where I was suddenly an Indian because I'd been sheltered in a weird way from that in my adopted home, and the world was just a morass of all kinds of stuff. And the only place that I could find shelter was in a library. And there was a librarian who worked there who saw me come in every day and saw the condition my clothes were in and saw the unwashedness of me and the desperation, I guess, in my eyes. And I just found books, and I would lose myself in books, and I'd go up to her and I'd have things written in a little notebook that I'd overheard, and I'd say, do you have anything on electromagnetic theory? And she'd say yes. And she'd bring me books on electromagnetic theory, and I would read them. And she saw the way that I drank those books in, and she kept bringing me more stuff. And she introduced me to music. This is a very long story, but I'll break it down. She introduced me to the world of recorded music, which is still a huge, huge part of my life. She introduced me to the stage and all the things that go on a stage. She introduced me to visual art, and she opened my world up at a time when it didn't seem possible that that was ever going to happen. And she was the one person who really, really taught me how to use all those tools that I encountered later when I met my people. And she filled my world up for me and made it possible for me to cultivate that hunger that a writer needs to always find more and to always grab more. And the second part of your question, after my first novel, Keeper and Me, came out, I would get packages from my publishing company with mail that had been addressed to them to be forwarded to me, and I'd find a place to sit down and go through those letters. And this was about a year and a half, a little longer after Keeper and Me had come out, and I was sitting in this restaurant reading these letters and having coffee and just kind of relaxing, and I got to this one letter, and it was from a young girl from Northwestern Ontario, and she said, wanted to thank me for writing this story and wanted to thank me for introducing her to the idea of this spirituality in our culture. And she said, because until I read that book, I was a cutter. And I would cut myself and I'd make myself bleed. And since I read your novel, I haven't cut myself in over a year. And I thought, that's why I want to do this. That's why.
In my case, I guess the person who probably had the biggest effect on me, and particularly in terms of this novel, would be my godfather, Danny Henry, who was Irish from Ireland. And actually at dinner tonight, I showed Richard a picture of Danny. Danny lived, he was the real deal kind of prospector. He never married, and he basically lived in tents in northwestern Ontario with stovepipes coming out of the the pitched roof of them. But he also was sort of a person who was a member of our family because he kept his equipment at our house, etc. And he came all the time, and he told me such wonderful stories about Ireland and such amazing folk histories that were connected to the part of Ireland, in fact, that my family had come from. And being first generation rather than fifth generation, he really connected me to the Irish landscape without me ever having laid eyes on it. And I think that that would have drawn me toward that book. And he was a great storyteller. So it had a beautiful voice and a wonderful sense of timing and rhythm. And a wonderful man who spent a lot of time alone in the woods. The most important reaction, I think, that I have had to my novels, and the one that matters the most to me, is the way that newer Canadians have responded to my work. I'm constantly amazed by this because I think, in a way, you know, I only have my own narrow experience. I'm not necessarily, I wasn't necessarily convinced that the kinds of things that I would write about would have been of such interest to people who came to this country only a couple of years ago, or 6 months ago, or in some cases 5, 10 years ago. However, especially this book, Away, because it's about an immigrant family that comes to this new geography and has to adjust to the new geography, it seems to have crossed the line in that regard. And I've been very, very pleased. There have been, and for some reason, these are the people who write letters to me, and I am so delighted to hear from them, to know that, you know, what it is that I am writing about it crosses lines and moves into other cultures, and that's pretty exciting as far as I'm concerned.
It's wonderful to know that when people write letters to you, you read them.
Oh, yes.
I think we've all, at some point in our lives, written to our favorite authors and wondered if it would ever got through all the layers. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Hi. Okay, as an author, do you ever experience creative blocks, and how do you deal with them?
The answer to that is yes, definitely. Especially if, you know, your husband brings home 7 people for dinner or something. But the way that, and they can happen without, I mean, I don't think there's any explanation for why the channels are open or why the channels are closed. They just seem to be that way. I think one of the things that I do, first of all, is I do not panic. I try to remember that I've experienced creative blocks before and that something has eventually happened. And then, you know, you just kind of open yourself to life and say, well, okay, I can't work today. Maybe tomorrow, maybe not for a month. But the world is so full of a number of things. I'm sure we should all be as happy as kings. And it seems to me the less attention that you pay to the creative block, the more likely it is that day after tomorrow it will return, or, as I say, maybe next month. But the other thing that I do, if I find that I can't work on a particular day and there's no external reason, such as children, dishes, laundry, shopping, income tax, God knows what, that's intercepting it, is I read. And I think that there's nothing like coming across, say, this book, Indian Horse, a book like this, a really fabulous piece of writing. There's nothing like it for making you want to get back to your own page. Not because you want to write another book just like Indian Horse, but you can see how important writing is and how life-enhancing it is. And you just, it inevitably will lead you back to the page.
Yeah, I like that. And I find that if I focus on the struggle becomes bigger. So I don't focus on it. I kind of have a rule that I work by that says that writing is not struggle. And so when I find myself starting to overthink, I stop. Not 5 minutes from now, but immediately. And I go and I do something that's totally unrelated to writing. I make a cup of tea, I go for a walk with the dog, I spin a saucer on my foot. I do something that's totally removed from that process and let my mind unravel itself, because I'm not continuing with the struggle. And then I come back when that feeling dissipates and I'm able to get back to work again. Maybe not for a great length of time, but I'm able to get back to it. And I think that the worst thing that I could do for myself would be to just focus on the struggle, because I would just give rise to more of it.
In a way, it's a bit like trying to go to sleep. When you can't sleep, you think, oh my God, I can't sleep. What's going to happen tomorrow if I can't sleep tonight? I'm going to be a wreck tomorrow. I can't sleep. And then, of course, you really can't sleep.
Welcome to my life. Any other thoughts from people?
What's your philosophy on life, your overriding philosophy that you apply to your writing, or that has given you wisdom in the topics you choose or the direction in your life?
Wow.
That's a biggie.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Huge.
Exactly. I would say just remaining open, keeping all the channels in your mind anyway as open as you can, and curiosity, trying to maintain your sense of curiosity, because if you're not curious, you're not going to be learning new things. And if you're not learning new things, you're not going to have anything else to say. And if you don't have anything else to say, you can't write another book.
Richard?
Yeah, I guess closely related to that, I try to remain aware of the fact that I don't know anything. And that the reason that I'm writing is to find something out. And the reason that I'm peopling it with the people that I'm doing that with is to find out even more about them and about the story. And the fact that I actually don't really know that much about living today, because it's a whole new day. And I can make all kinds of plans that I want to, but it's actually not in my control. And that if I keep myself open to the fact that I don't know anything, and I keep myself open to learning more and more, I arm myself with a lot of really cool stuff that I wouldn't have encountered if I hadn't had that viewpoint of myself.
I think what I'm going to do now is ask maybe Richard and Jane, if they could, to just share a final small reading with us this evening. And if there's a particular message you wanted to share with that reading, but it's such a joy to hear you read the words that you've written down. It really is an honor. Thank you.
I'm just going to read a little tiny bit concerning the father of this family, this man who has immigrated from Ireland, teacher, had been a hedge school teacher and is now a teacher in a Canadian school. At the school, Brian began to teach the children an entirely different history of the British Empire than the one outlined by Egerton Ryerson in his prospectus for Upper Canadian schools. Speaking in the confidential tones of a man imparting wisdom via fireside, he told of the land seizures which had preceded the plantation of English and Scottish Protestants in Ulster. Turning slowly from the slate board as if his body were an old hinge, he would glare out from under bushy brows at what was to him now a blurred sea of small faces, and demand that some young scholar recite the rights that were denied Catholics in Ireland during the 18th century at the time of the penal laws. He scratched the words, "they could not," on the board, and the children, delighted with the game, would shout out the answers enthusiastically in unison. "Purchase or lease land," they cried, "become educated, practice a profession, vote, run for public office, practice their religion, own a horse worth more than £5, keep the profits from their rented land, or speak Gaelic." And what is Gaelic, he would say? Gaelic is the language of scholars and poets. He was warned several times about this approach to history, but because the men in the community trusted him, despite his Catholicism, and the children loved him, they were hesitant to let him go. Later, however, in June of 1866, when a small band of Fenians stumbled over the border from the United States, determined to fight for Ireland on the closest plot of British ground, their sad, ineffectual skirmishes caused such a widespread outbreak of anti-Irish sentiment that the Board of Trustees for Madoc Township voted unanimously that Brian should be retired from active duty. Liam had just finished giving fresh feed to Genesis, Leviticus, Acts, and Ruth. These are cows, by the way. Moon had died the year before of old age, another cow, and had been buried tearfully by the small family near the spot where the mother lay. When he heard his father's voice in the distance, "For freedom comes from God's right hand and needs a godly train," he sang as he strode into view, "and righteous men must make our land a nation once again." As she had the year before, and in the same month, Eileen stood by the window with a newspaper in her hands. This time she was reading the words of the Fenian proclamation that General Sweeney had brought with him when he had attempted to invade Canada. Her father sat with his arms stretched out in front of him on the table and his head moving up and down. Liam, watching him from the other side of the room, could not decide whether his father was nodding in agreement or whether his head was becoming too heavy to hold upright because of weakness. I've always found this, by the way, just as I'm going to intercede a bit at this moment, to be so mild when you consider what happened. I mean, they brought out the militia, the army, the everything when the Fenians, and there really were only about a dozen of them, quote, invaded Canada. Here's the proclamation that they sent out in advance. "We come among you as foes of British rule in Ireland. We have taken up the sword to deliver Ireland from the tyrant. We do not propose to divest you of a single right you now enjoy. We are here as friends of liberty against despotism, of democracy against aristocracy. To Irishmen, to Irishmen across the province, we appeal in the name of 7 centuries of British iniquity and Irish misery. We offer the honest grasp of friendship. Take it. Irishmen, Frenchmen, Americans, take it and trust it. We shall endeavor to merit the confidence of friends. The latter enemies can expect from us nothing but the leniency of a determined but generous foe and the restraints and relations imposed by civilized warfare. For this, they took away my children," Brian said. "They took away my school." Then he walked into the back room and flung himself down on his bed. Thank you very much.
So there's joy in Indian Horse. It's not all the bleak and despairing story of residential schools. There's joy and there's release and there's freedom. And Saul finds it in the game of hockey. And when he discovers the game, he also discovers that the rules of the residential school say that only the older boys can play. But he's so drawn to the magic of the game, he wants to be as close to it as he can get. So he asks if it's okay if he cleans the rink, if he shovels the snow, and he gets a chance to do that. Cleaning the rink became my assigned chore, and I would rise to do it before anyone else in the school was up, before the nuns, before the priests, before the cooks even got to the kitchen to start the oatmeal mush and dry toast that was our regular breakfast. I needed no alarm clock. I'd just wake and dress carefully in the dimness and creep downstairs in my stocking feet to the back door where I kept my thin rubbers. I'd pull on an extra pair of wool socks Father Le Boutillier had found for me and clamber into my winter coat and scarf and mitts and step out onto the back stairs. The edge of those mornings always caught at my lungs. The air was so cold and so pure it was hard to breathe. But I'd huff a breath or two and stamp my feet to get the blood moving, then walk slowly around the school and beyond the barn to where the rink stood. It was a purple world, with only the varying degrees of light from the moon that allowed me to see. I'd get my shovel from where I'd stashed it in the snow and I'd begin. I'd start at one side and push the snow to the foot of the boards that faced out onto the field. Once the rink was scraped clear, I'd work my way along the length of the boards, pitching the snow in piles over. I loved the feeling of my heaving breath in the clouds of fog that swirled around my head. I'd sweat. When I was done, I would lean against the boards and examine my handiwork, the smooth gray plate of ice in the dim morning light, the idea of the game hanging in the frost. I was out on that rink every morning, even when the snow fell faster than I could shovel it. At first, I was simply grateful for my proximity to the game, but then I began to stash a hockey stick in the snow beside the boards. Once I'd made sure no one was around, I'd dig it out and run to the barn for a handful of the frozen horse turds I'd buried beside the door. I'd carry them back to the rink and drop them at one end. Then I'd take my stick and nudge one turd out of the heap and practice moving it back and forth, stick handling like I'd seen the players on Hockey Night in Canada do. I moved it carefully so I wouldn't break it. I wanted to develop a soft touch, a deft weaving like the player Jean Beliveau, streaming up ice with the puck dangling on the blade of his stick like it was tied there on invisible twine. I made sure my stick made no sound against the ice, lest somebody discover me there. When the first turd eventually broke apart, I'd take another and I'd march up ice again with my substitute puck. I moved my feet as though I were skating, working the turd from side to side, making wider and wider sweeps. I got so I could slip it between my feet when I reached the end boards, spin around, cradle it in the middle of the blade, and start back down the ice again. When all the turds were broken, I'd flick the pieces over the boards with the wrist shot motion I'd seen Dave Ballone of the New York Rangers use. And if you're an old fan like I had, you remember that wrist shot. It was what Lanny McDonald studied when he was learning his. Then I'd stash my stick in the snow, shovel clear the evidence of my practice, and head back to the building for breakfast and school. At night, in the dormitory when all the other boys were asleep, I would get out of bed and stand in the aisle between the rows of cots where the moonlight made the linoleum look like ice and mimic the motion of stick handling. I pictured myself barreling across the blue line with the puck tucked neatly on the blade of my stick. I would throw a broad feint at the final defender and race in alone toward the goalie, who would begin to retreat slowly into the crease. I would shift my weight from foot to foot as I skated, dancing, wriggling, faking, the puck still nestled in the cradle of my blade. The space between the goalie and me would shrink, and when I got about 10 feet away, I would draw the puck back behind my right leg. Then I would drive my weight forward onto my left leg and allow the momentum to bring the stick and the puck forward. When the weight transfer was right, I'd snap my wrists and send the puck in a blur high into the right-hand corner, bulging the twine behind the helpless goaltender. Naturally, the force of my shot would take me to one knee. I would raise my arms in the hushed light of the dorm. My mouth would be open with glee, and I would face the picture of Jesus, hung there on the wall, my salvation coming instead through wood and rubber and ice and the dream of a game. I'd stand there, arms held high in triumph, and I would not feel lonely or afraid, deserted or abandoned, but connected to something far bigger than myself. Then I'd climb back into bed and sleep until the dawn broke, and I would walk back out to the rink again.
I've learned to love dancing. I've learned to love hockey, thanks to both of you this evening. Thank you, thank you. What a fabulous evening we've had. Thank you to everybody for joining us here at the Waverley Library, and a huge thank you to Thunder Bay Public Library, who on very short notice helped put this together. So to the Thunder Bay Public Library, to all of you, we say thank you. What better tribute to librarians than the story that Richard shared a little earlier this evening. So that's something that's pretty special here this evening as well. Thank you to Shaw for providing television coverage. Now you can watch the edited version of this on Shaw Cable coming up on, I think, 5 o'clock tomorrow, then again on Saturday and Sunday. And if you're outside the city of Thunder Bay, Kenora Drive in Fort Francis, apparently it's at 4 p.m. Central on those times as well. How do we begin to say thank you to Jane Urquhart and Richard Wagamese for coming to Thunder Bay in the dead of winter, but as we know, you love winter here. You've written about it so well. How does it feel to be getting all set for the big Canada Reads debates? Are you nervous?
No, because we don't have to debate.
know,
We
but
have advocates that are going to do it for us. And one of us, that would be me, is not going to be listening.
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
What about you, Richard? Are you going to be listening?
I'm not sure yet. I know that the other big passion in my life, baseball, spring training opens almost at the same time. So I'm going to be kind of cleft in twain whether I'm paying attention to spring training or Canada Reads, but that's always going to be the battle.
There you go. So anyway, that starts, by the way, on the week of February 11th, and that'll be happening at 11 o'clock every morning on CBC Radio 1. Then if you miss it because you might have to do silly things like work, it'll be on again at 8 o'clock in the evening. And it'll be live streamed as well with a live chat on CBC Books, and will also be aired on the documentary channel and on CBC TV. You're not going to be able to escape it. You might not listen, but it's going to be everywhere. So if you want to find out, check out the website, cbc.ca/books. And of course, we're going to be playing back some of this next week on Superior Morning, which we're really looking forward to. I want to say thank you as well to my CBC cohorts here this evening. You may not know this, but there's a small army of CBC people here. Not that you've noticed the T-shirts. Our program manager, Susan Rogers, who's helped put this together. So Susan is here. Amy Hadley, Jolene Banning down at the back of the room. Proudly wearing CBC T-shirts as well. Jean Ballack is here, the magical Jean Ballack, who can somehow make all this happen. Elliot Dockstader-Wynn was here a little earlier, but he snuck out because apparently he has to get up early tomorrow morning. Figure that one out. Josh Lynn is here as well. Josh has been doing all the magic with the board here. Jodie Porter's down there as well, trying to hide away and not wearing her CBC T-shirt, but I'm not going to let that get away. Our Professor Emeritus, Gerald Graham, is also here this evening. So. And again, thank you to all of you for coming. It has been an absolute delight. We're so glad you're here. We do have some draws. We're going to be taking place a little later on. We're going to be doing this after the wrap-up of the broadcast. But thank you for warming up a very cold January night. All of you for coming, and to Richard and Jane, thank you. I'll never forget this evening. Thank you.